First off, this is a true story. Not a story that's scary because it's labeled as true. This story is about drug addicts and ghosts. So, rewind a handful of years back to 14 years old me and my best friend at the time. We had been goofing off all day outside because it was the summer, and we finally decided to come back in to the safety of the air conditioning. We had the kind of dynamic that when you started laughing, it would get progressively worse until your belly was shaking and your lungs were begging for air. This is relevant, because while we were enjoying the warm, really bright, sunny afternoon, we heard something that made us instantly go dead silent. As we were laughing in a fit of hysteria, suddenly, a very clear male voice laughed what sounded like behind us. Bear with me here if you don't believe in ghosts, because this is just half of the story. I remember it was so loud, gruff, and just, you don't hear that every day, you know? We turned to each other slowly, eyes wide, then burst out in laughter so hard I almost tipped backwards in the kitchen chair. It scared us so much that we couldn't contain how funny it was to see each other be scared shitless. For a long time we told that story of the random giggling ghost we heard, but it turned much more grim in my head as I began to realize the full nature of that day. So now, fast forward a couple of years. Honestly, this part is what creeps me out about this. It's now about 2022, I'm 16. My mom and my stepdad had noticed that odd things were going on in our boiler room behind our house. For one, we didn't have a lock that properly functioned on the door. So they would go back there to the door, sometimes being fully swung open, light on. Over time they noticed things being moved around, trash being left in the room, and at times, even needles. We discovered that before our stay there, it was a major drug house. I'm sure you've already began to paint a picture of what went on that day when my friend and I were goofing off. If not, I'll paint the map. In the kitchen where we sat, we heard the disembodied voice coming from behind us. But it sounded faint enough to be from another room. The boiler room was on the other side of the wall next to the kitchen table. All in all, we quite literally might not have been alone that day. Which to me is scarier than it being a ghost. To this day, I have no idea who was in the boiler room listening to us chat about school, boys, anime, and other random nonsense. You could hear absolutely everything from that room, as I'd been out there before. Conversations inside sound clear as day. This was followed by a number of instances over the years where I'd be alone in the kitchen late at night between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. and hear scuffles coming from seemingly nowhere. Just movement. Like someone moving around or moving things around. There is a chance it could have been paranormal, but I kind of doubt it. The laugh was so loud it literally just sounded like a man in the other room. Anyways, keep your doors locked, guys. I have a summer cabin built in the middle of the forest. That day started off well. I spent the daytime chopping wood and fixing my bike. Then I had a great idea. Why not take a tent and camp at the beach? It was a beautiful day, and I had nothing else planned. My family agreed to the idea. By the time I finished fixing my bike, it was around 6 p.m. Keep in mind, this was August, so it got dark quickly. The beach I had in mind wasn't just a shore. Behind it was a dense stretch of thick, dark northern European forest. I gathered everything we needed, logs, gasoline, and food, and headed there. I got a fire started, but soon realized 3 logs wouldn't last long. So, I began looking for more sticks. By this point, the sun was setting, and darkness crept in. I started to wonder why my family hadn't arrived yet. While searching, I noticed a light coming from the woods behind the shore, the dense forest I mentioned earlier. Along with the light, I heard strange, distorted sounds. Being the curious idiot I am, I decided to investigate. I discovered a trail that I'd never noticed before. I biked down it for a while, picking up larger sticks I could use for the fire. That's when I caught a whiff of something awful, a putrid, rotting stench. By now, it was pitch black, but I had a headlamp attached to my purple Lakers cap. Then I saw it. Behind a tree, something was standing, tall, with enormous antlers. It was on 2 legs and watching me. Panic surged through me. I hopped on my bike as fast as I could. Suddenly, I heard the loudest scream I've ever heard, followed by the sound of galloping behind me. I pedaled like my life depended on it, all the way back to the cabin. When I arrived, I found my family calmly going about their evening. My grandfather was reading the newspaper, and my grandmother was sipping tea while playing Duolingo. I demanded to know why they hadn't come to the beach. They looked at me, confused, and asked, "What do you mean? Go where?" I explained that we'd planned to go camping, but they stared at me as if I were crazy. I eventually dropped the subject, but I was so shaken that I slept on the second floor that night. There's a window up there, and I wanted to keep watch in case something approached. We locked all the doors and stayed quiet for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. The next morning, I convinced my grandfather to return to the spot with me. This time, I brought my .22 rifle. When we got there, I found the remains of something that smelled even worse than the night before. Among the debris, I discovered a piece of flesh, gray, with jagged bones sticking out of it. The bones had the exact same shape as the antlers I'd seen on that creature. But there was no sign of the creature itself. No tracks, no nothing. Even the campfire I'd set up was gone. The tent had vanished too. For the background, I'm deaf, I have hearing aid and cochlear implant. Due to years of speech classes, I can talk and use sign language. Anyway, when I was in 5th grade, me and my grandma moved to a complex house. We live above while her boyfriend lived below. It was a cute small apartment with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and had a window that overlooked the driveway, and there's a door in the kitchen that goes up to attic. Just a few weeks after we moved in, my grandma have an old radio station on the table in the kitchen, and it doesn't work, but she likes it, so she use it for decoration. One night, I was woken up by a very loud noises. I have little bit of hearing left in my left ear, so I could hear it but couldn't make out what it was. I saw my grandma rushing down the hallway, and so I follow her into the kitchen. The radio's light was on, like greenish light, and it sounded like static. She couldn't turn it off and signed to me to unplug it. I checked. It wasn't plug in. It finally stopped a few minutes later. Around Thanksgiving, me and my grandma went up to attic to get some Christmas stuff. The attic is small, very narrow, and you could see outside through a little window. I had an uneasy feelings and didn't want to stay up there because I felt like I will be grabbed. There was a door that's completely bolted on the other side of the room. Few days pass. My grandma was at work and wanted me to go up. I was nervous and bit afraid but forced myself to go. I went upstairs to the attic and saw the door was not bolted, it was wide open. I had a feeling that someone was looking directly at me, and suddenly there was a loud thud behind the door. I just ran down the stair and locked the door. It got worse for a week. I was waking up feeling like I was being held down. The footsteps in the hall got louder and there was banging on the wall. I would joke with my grandma that the ghost knows that I'm deaf. Well, my bed was shaken for a few days, scaring me out of my slumber, and I was losing sleep. The final straw was when I was sleeping. I had a bookshelf with dolls on it just across the room. My bed was shaken and I suddenly felt something falling on me. 3 of my glass dolls fell on my face. I definitely had bruise for days from that. My grandma once woken up to the sound of her stepdad calling her by her nickname. Her stepdad died when I was 3 turning 4. So this definitely shook her up because she could even smell the old cologne that he would always use along with smell of coffee. After college, I got a job as a handy person in senior housing. It was awesome because I hadn't really had much exposure to grandparents before. Many of the seniors loved me, and I loved them. They were always giving me things like food and furniture. Being young and having almost nothing in my home, I welcomed the offerings. There were these 2 sisters, Daphne and Velma, not their real names, and I'm guessing they've since passed. Nice ladies, kinda needy, a little haughty, and somewhat well-to-do. Daphne, the older sister, gave me a yellow love seat with a blue and maroon flower print. It had belonged to their aunt, who had just passed away. Death and the afterlife don't freak me out, so I didn't mind at all. It wasn't exactly bachelor style, but it was a seat built for 2. Months later, my partner and I were hanging out at my new place. The remote for the TV fell into the cushion and past the frame of the love seat. It was one of those worst-case scenarios for retrieval, but not impossible. So, I got on my stomach. I'm laying on the love seat and reached down past the frame in the back of the love seat. As I came into contact with the remote, something grabbed my arm. It was a full-on grab. I felt each finger wrap around my forearm. It didn't hurt, burn, or felt cold. However, it was firm and indistinguishable that I'd been grabbed. I pulled my arm out quickly, remote in hand. I was wide-eyed and a bit shaken. I knew no one could be hiding inside the love seat. It was light as a feather, and I could move it myself easily. But I was so glad I got the remote because there was no way I was going back in there after that. My partner, now wife, noticed my sudden movement and change in demeanor. I told her, something just grabbed me. It had to have been a spirit. Needless to say, when I moved, the yellow love seat stayed behind. I was a paranormal investigator with a local team for a few years before circumstances made me unable to keep up with the team. During that time, I fought off multiple strong attacks from non-corporeal beings who wanted to either harm or possess me. I saw and heard things that were definitely not normal. There was a team member who had a habit of taking artifacts home from a variety of places, many of which were inhabited, cursed, etc. The same team member also has a rather dramatic family life that can sometimes become exacerbated by the energies that exist in her home. This team member asked the team's leader if we could bring our equipment to her home and investigate since there had been a sharp escalation of negative activity from both corporeal and non-corporeal sources within the walls. We agreed to the request and set an appointment. After meeting at headquarters and getting the equipment loaded, the team decided who would be drivers and who would ride in the drivers' vehicles to the location since there would be limited parking. I was one of the drivers and had 3 team members and an ice chest of soda and food in my car. The drive took about 40 minutes, then we got a walkthrough for additional information and deciding on camera placement. We had a few team members already setting up the base under the carport for monitors and such. While in the living room of the home, the team member showed us multiple display cases of dolls. Many of the dolls were artifacts, so captured my interest. One in particular had a red dress, white pinafore, and red bonnet. It was a small porcelain doll with beautifully painted features. When I was turning to move away from the case, the doll that I just described reached toward me. I started to doubt what I saw, but a team member who was next to me said, "That doll just moved." For me, that confirmed what I had seen. I almost ran out of that place. I have never before or since had such a strong desire to run. I willed myself to stay and investigate despite the scary moving doll because I wanted to find out what I could do to help with the negative activity in the home.